All right, welcome to What's New. This is on location. I drove all the way uptown to come to Tulane University, Freeman School of Business, to meet with my longtime friends and great debaters, Rob Lalka and Emily Egan, who are both part of the Albert Lepage Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and who are deep, passionate uh, leaders of the ecosystem. And so we're going to dig deep into the 2024 Greater New Orleans Startup Report. But I promise you we'll divert.
Promise.
We will hopefully come up with some useful information, but more importantly, the goal is to get information out about this report. So the 2024 Greater New Orleans Startup Report. This is your sixth report since 2019. So,
Correct.
Rob, Emily, welcome. What is the purpose of this report? Why do y'all do this?
So we started this pretty much after I began here at Tulane. And so I was about a year in, and to give the full backstory, there's a dear friend, Adam Zuckerman, who lives in Washington, D.C., and he runs a firm called Fosterly, among other things that he does. He's an entrepreneur as well. And Fosterly had done this in D.C. It was really smart. It was, hey, what's going on in the Washington, D.C. area and the sort of D.C., that part of Maryland, that part of Virginia, entrepreneurial ecosystem? Because there was a lot of growth, but no one knew whether it was a lot of hype or actually substantial. And so Adam just started this project, and he built a real nice methodology around it. And he had sort of shut it down at that point. He ran innovation for the Discovery Channel and has had many other hats, but he had reached a point in his life where he wanted to leave this project behind. And that was right when I was starting this role at Tulane.
Mm-hmm.
And so I cajoled him, I think is probably the right word, into bringing it to us and letting us run with the methodology and staff it up and have the resources to be able to run with it. And what's really amazing about it is over time, the community has really responded. And so over 30 different ecosystem partners, you know who you are. I can't name them.
Which is amazing. 30 partners,
30.
right? Okay.
Actually, it's 40.
We're up
40.
to 40 now. I said over 30, and now we can say 40. I love it. It's beautiful.
And that's grown.
Yeah, every year.
40
It was
ecosystem.
like 20 something when we first started.
Okay, so a double of ecosystem partners. Okay.
They're stepping up, and they send the survey out to all of their companies, whether they are high growth startups or whether they are small businesses. And the goal is
within the region.
within the 10 parish region. Yep.
Okay.
And that's our goal, is to figure out what's actually going on here. I've been going on too long. Emily, talk about sort of the questions. Like, what are we asking?
Yeah, so the survey is about 100 questions, give or take, depending on the responses to the questions. So some of them are conditional. But we ask them things such as, where are you located? What does your office look like? Are you in a leased commercial space, home office? Just those types of things. What's the square footage? Are you planning on moving? Are you going to change your office type? So drilling down even to that point. Then we ask them about their sales, their revenue, what they're projecting, what they had in actual. Have they raised money? If you have, what type and how much? Are you planning on raising money? If so, all these different things. What's your employee makeup? How many veterans do you have? People of color, women, all these different things, types of roles. So it is very extensive.
How long does it take to fill out?
So it's an excellent question.
We've been trying to make it easier for everybody. We swear.
The number one piece of feedback we get on this is that it's too long, right? So we get that. It depends on the complexity of your organization, right? If you're new and you're kind of more of a single founder or have a few employees, you could probably get through it in about 15 to 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
If you're a more mature organization, raise money, have more employees, it can take you somewhere between about 40 minutes to an hour. It's funny because every time we try to predict how much time, we get the exact opposite feedback, right? So we say 20 minutes, it took too long. You can't ask us to give an hour. And you're like, we're trying to figure it out, right? So we are trying to
walk around the
some
park.
things.
So walk around the park.
Yeah. Also, for the more mature organizations, a lot of times what we have are like they're filling it out. They'll have somebody fill it out for them. It's not necessarily the founder that's filling it out, but yeah.
And we will work with them, Tim.
Yeah.
This is one thing that we will work with folks to make sure that gets filled out, and that we have staff to help with this and student fellows. We also were working to figure out how to auto-populate a number of pieces of this so that it'll be easier. So for those of you who've been filling it out with us for many years, we thank you.
Yes.
We really thank you, and we hope it's useful for you, because ultimately, I mean, I think one thing to sort of talk about why would you do all of this as one company, it's because it does influence policymakers.
Yep.
It does influence investors. It does influence a lot of decision makers about the future of our ecosystem. And so we make sure that the overall report, the anonymized aggregated data, is shared with everyone all the way up in state politics. And we use Tulane's networks for that. And then we also are making sure that we're sharing it in every conversation we have with somebody who's going to be influential, whether it's a future investor, whomever it may be. And so we've been trying to make sure that the overall data adds value, and it is all anonymized and aggregated. So even though we're getting that really in-depth knowledge about who each company is, no one else is seeing that than us here at Tulane, who are working on the data to make sure that we can report out on it.
Imagine what you said, that from the hype of the early days of here's what we think's happening, this is now a beautiful report, and I imagine will lead to more funding of the ecosystem and validation all the way up.
That's right. So, and there's a box you can check of, are you looking for investment? Would you mind if we kept an eye out for you, essentially? And that's been great, because it helps us to know, who's ready for that conversation.
So on a high level, over the last 6 years, you got 6 years, what high level trends are you seeing? If you were to sort of give me an overarching, here's what's happened over the last 6 years you've seen from this.
It's hard. It's actually really hard to answer that question. I'll tell you why. The first year, the 2019 version was sort of our, we did it. Let's check it off the list. But what you notice within the 2019 is there's a heavy Tulane bias in that, in the sense that it really kind of worked within the networks, and it was not representative of the broader ecosystem, both demographically speaking. We had really an underrepresented group of minorities in comparison to what they should actually be, right? So then you have 2020. So 2020, we closed the data collection in February of 2020, and we all know what happened March 2020.
Right.
Bottom fell out of the world, right? And so that was where we had to really look at ourselves to say, are we even actually going to put this report out this year? Because all of the data for future facing is useless, right? But that's also where we identified the equity gaps for BIPOC founders. And so we chose to put it out, to put a highlight on the fact that, what we knew was sort of happening already, because it was happening sort of nationally, we could attach some actual numbers to what it looks like for a Black entrepreneur to try and access lending or equity financing, right? And so that gave us a benchmark that we were able to track over time. So then we do 2021. 2021, you've got that pesky hurricane, and then we noticed
what
that
a crazy place to live.
Just some normalcy would be awesome, right? To be able, so we can answer the trends. But that's also then when we saw the gender gaps, right? So that female founders were having a harder time raising venture capital and angel capital. And again, not that was a hugely, monumentous sort of discovery. We knew it was there, just we had the data to point to it. And so then what you just have in the past couple of years after that is really just how New Orleans is managing all this sort of uncertainty, the post-COVID, the hurricane, just general economic sort of strife. And so there's areas where one of the interesting things was I think it was the 2022 report, I believe, is where we saw that where everybody else was decentralizing their workforce, New Orleans, the most common workspace was leased commercial space and had actually replaced home office. And so there was just some really interesting things that were happening in that data that where we kind of were almost an outlier, right? And that we saw that New Orleans, and even in conversations that we had with real estate firms and things like that, the data spoke to what they were seeing, which is actually in New Orleans, people wanted to come back together, which I think speaks a lot to how New Orleans is. And so then, as we move forward into this year's reports, the past few years, I would say, Robbie, is that sort of things are just kind of ebbing and flowing right there. You got peaks, you got valleys, right? And then this year, I think you're just seeing a little bit more of that as people were sort of bracing for the recession that never actualized. And we have some really interesting things as it relates to AI, which I'm sure
Yeah.
we'll talk about.
What have you seen, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, what's powerful about the data is that it makes the scales fall from your eyes. And so you may think that the world is a certain way, and you might be right, but there are also assumptions and biases that always go into this with all of us. So I always tell my students, your world is not the world, that your understanding of the world is incomplete. It is not the full world. And that especially helps us as entrepreneurs, because if your world were the world, then you would already have a multi-billion-dollar business, because the customers would come flocking to the thing that you had to sell that came from your brain, right? That came from this light bulb moment. That's not the way, of course, we all know it works. The way it works is customer discovery, learning from customers what they actually need, how that thing needs to reach them, how they want to be sold and communicated with. I mean, that is the beauty of entrepreneurship, is that you're getting out of your own head and your own experience and living in that other person's life, at least enough to know what they want to buy from you, right? And so it's a similar thing when we look at this data each year. We experience New Orleans on a daily basis, and we have a certain feeling for how it's going with our entrepreneurs, and we watch what's happening as the SSBCI money either comes out or it doesn't, or as people are having conversations about deal flow, or all of those things. But we're only seeing through a mirror dimly. Like, it's a very much an in part conversation compared to the actual reality. And so the data helps us to understand a little bit more about what's going on. This reminds me of the Mike Bloomberg line of, "In God we trust, and everybody else should bring data," right? Like, bring the data so we know what's actually happening here. And the reality is that New Orleans is trying to figure this stuff out, is what we're seeing in the data right now.
Are you optimistic? Like, I mean,
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there.
well, let's go there. Let's. I mean, in terms of digging deep in this, and I mean, people seem to be more conservative about hiring, right? And the less optimistic about revenue. They're not raising early stage, but it looks like they're raising later stage. Less women are in leadership roles, but women are raising more money. So this wasn't a rosy, but this is, be clear, this is a data set.
That's right.
Right? So reading this, tell me, what do you see? What did y'all see digging deep going into this?
Well, I mean, you know me, I'm a perpetual optimist, and so
we got to be.
I am, and so that will be my answer probably until the day I die. But looking at the data, what I would say is that this shows, and to Emily's earlier point, this shows that, like, we did go through COVID, and we responded to that, and we responded to not only the inequities that we already had in terms of investing in women and minorities. And especially in the moment after George Floyd's murder, like, that is definitely a part of this conversation nationally. It's a part of this conversation in our ecosystem, right? And we can track those trends in the data in terms of more investment in BIPOC entrepreneurs right after that horrible event. And so, those are the types of things that you can see in the data, that I'm actually very grateful that the companies that are a part of this continue to participate, so that we can continue to see how we're responding. So that your question is really, how are we responding this year compared to where we were before? And what I would say is that, like, we definitely benefited from the fact that there was not a recession, okay? Like, there was not just a soft landing. Like, we didn't even need to land. Things kept going up globally in terms of what you see with the Magnificent Seven, and so the big tech companies. They've bolstered the market, right? Which of course benefits the people who are invested in that market. Not everybody in a city, but at least the people who are invested. And for the tech story, that definitely has played through a lot of our high growth ventures in terms of how they're using AI, but they're trying to figure it out, is what I would say. In this year's report, we asked new questions about how we're using artificial intelligence and machine learning. And it is both something that the founders of these companies and other executives are saying, this is one of the most exciting things that I've seen, and I am very afraid of this thing as well. Like, that's what they're talking about.
I'm going to get to AI in a second, because I think that is interesting, what you guys talked about. One thing you guys said, which is interesting, well, in 2020 when we had the exits, what, $2.8 billion worth of exits, and that was optimism. That was, we're here. And then you had COVID, and then you had Ida. That double whammy, how much did that do to this ecosystem, or not? everyone around the world had COVID.
Yeah.
People didn't have the back end whammy of either. Did that slow things down, or were there other factors that might have influenced this?
I mean, I'll bring in my own just personal experience, and Emily and I have talked about this a lot. Just Ida was hard, in part because it changed the calculus for a lot of insurers about our region. And that meant that we had real costs that suddenly impacted our own finances personally. That which I felt, you felt, everybody listening to this has probably felt in some way, shape, or form, is real. That is a real cost of living here that is now something that makes it harder for someone to start a company.
Might be the difference.
If you're paying $10,000 a year and you were, instead of putting that towards home insurance, you were putting that aside to start your business, you don't have that to put aside.
Yep.
It is as straightforward as that. Or if you were trying to recruit someone to come to New Orleans and they run the numbers, they're smart enough to run the numbers and figure out, oh, it's not just the cost of this home, but the insurance would make it $10,000 more a year.
Yeah.
That is a real cost. That is a real cost that person's family would have to absorb. And it's not like you can pay them a $10,000 more check in their it hits their bank account, but to be able to offset that, that's a real cost to you if you're going to do that.
I mean, that's pain. That's real pain.
That's right.
So in the report, it doesn't say it directly, but it seems there's fewer people starting up. People getting funded later stage, which is great. We're getting some of the later stage. Is that an anecdote? Is that just something is that just an observation, but that's not in the data? Are less people starting right now in New Orleans because of the things you're saying?
I mean, again, I would say this would be purely by observation.
Yeah.
It's not in the data. I think you also have to look at like types of businesses. So I do think that I think you are still seeing that there's a lot of activity in terms of the small businesses and those licenses and things like that. On the high growth side, probably because it's a higher risk, I would imagine that is slowed down. I mean, because you even have to think about, like, you think about your own personal property, right? But the insurance factors also affect commercial properties as well, and the insurance on that. And so you think, okay, well, if I'm renting an office space, well, what did that do to my rent? Or even if I have a storefront, what did that do to my rent based on the amount more that the owner of the property needs to pay? And that's my storefront. Or I own my building that I operate my business out of, but what happened with my property insurance on that, right? And so in addition to paying the $10,000 more on your house, you're also paying X number more on that. And so just sort of how you navigate starting a business is financially burdensome on its own under the best circumstances. How do you then calculate to do that, especially in a high growth way where you know you're not going to be making any money for the foreseeable future? How do you do that? And so I think the opportunity presents itself maybe to someone who has the ability to fund that on their own for a little bit. And so that eliminates a very large group of the population. I mean, not just like, you're talking, 95% of the population is probably out of the mix at that point in time, right? And so how do you do that with all these different costs? So I do think just anecdotally that would have to play a part.
So let's shift gears into optimism, right?
Yay.
I mean, in terms of this is, and we're talking probably to the entrepreneurs, who are, you've got an ecosystem of 40 people who are here dedicated to supporting. You've got theoretically the
40 organizations that are awesome, and a lot
40 organizations which are dedicated to supporting all types of entrepreneurs within the city.
Yep.
Check.
Yep.
You got major universities engaged, Tulane, UNO, Xavier, Loyola, are actively engaged in entrepreneurship. Check.
And I would say more engaged than I've seen since I moved here.
Michael Hecht at Genoink believes in entrepreneurship. Josh Flagg, the Director of Innovation.
Yep.
State, check. And now you've got $100 million X of capital, SSB, DCI. We won't debate that. But theoretically, there's capital coming down through the system.
Right.
Oh my God. And going back to what you said, there's this new technology called AI. So you focused your report on the new shiny object, or AI, which other cities now are having a rapid growth of startup high growth activity. So your report said, which I thought was interesting, 60% said that AI represents the biggest threat. 61% said it also could be the biggest opportunity. So I'm just interested. 60% of people responded said, "Oh shit," but you know what? This could be great.
And similarly, 60% longest lasting impact. So it's basically the equal percentage across all three questions.
So let's talk about AI and the opportunity with the ecosystem now growing, with the funding in place. What do you guys think about AI, and what did you see, and what do you think about the opportunities?
So both the trepidation and the exuberance is very real. That's what you learn from that data.
Yeah.
That is convincing data that this is not just something one of you out there is feeling about AI. This is a feeling that everyone seems to be feeling, or not everyone, but many, many, many people are feeling. And it is the old idea of, that you can hold two things in your mind at the same time that may seem to be contradictory, but they actually can both be true at the same time, right? You can both be very excited about this and very afraid of it at the same time. Both of those emotional states, that may seem to be contradictory on the surface, but we are human beings that are complex, and we can feel both very excited and very afraid about the future, and especially about the future of something as transformative as what artificial intelligence and machine learning, as it continues to advance, feels like. And so I would venture a guess that if you ran those same numbers in just about any other city, it'd probably be about the same for entrepreneurs. They're very excited about what these tools can do, and they're very nervous about how it could make it so that their business suddenly gets upended in a way that they don't realize is happening until it's too late. And so for me, that's a great time to be an entrepreneur, because that means that if you can fight the fear and make sure the fear is not driving you, and learn how to manage your emotions around the fear, and then fuel the energy around the excitement and use it for your advantage, like that's a powerful force, right? If you give in to the fear and suddenly the fear is what's driving your decision making, you're probably going to fail, right? And so that to me is what I would encourage people listening to this to think through, is like, how am I letting the fear of AI hold me back from even trying it out and testing it out, or not allowing my employees to use it, or not paying for subscriptions because I don't want them to put our data in there or other things, and instead shift towards, how do I use this in a way that I can sandbox with it, play around with it, learn from it, learn with it, and then figure out how it can be put to its highest and best use. But here's the thing, it is a tool. And especially like ChatGPT, Claude, these are tools that are not Google search engines. It's not you go into it and get the answers and the answers spit back out to you. And so for all of us who are used to using Google for the last 2 decades, this is not that. These are chat tools. And the thing for me, especially as I think through how our entrepreneurs can use these tools better, is figuring out how you can build that chat tool into something that will help you as you're chatting with it. And so you are my co-pilot around whatever task that we're trying to get done, or around whatever growth in the business you need to see. And you work with that tool. So I need new marketing copy for better social media to pump out over the next 2 months. Great. You tell it what it is. You ask it questions and go back and forth. You work on your prompts, and I would encourage everyone to look at how to do better prompt engineering. Lots of free resources online for that. Use that to figure out how to build the tool into a sharpened tool for your purpose, and then use it on a daily basis as you're working towards that task. If it's social media and better LinkedIn posts and that's great. You don't just turn to it on day one, ask it to give you better LinkedIn posts, and then turn it off. You're using it and training it over time so that it becomes more useful for you. And ultimately, as a co-pilot, that will allow you as an entrepreneur to be able to do what you're doing faster, better, cheaper, all of those good things. And so that's what being optimistic about this tool looks like. It's actually figuring out how to make sure that you are irreplaceable as the human being in that equation, in that conversation. And the tool itself is something that you know how to use as readily as you know how to use any of the other tools, your CRM system or email or any of these other tools that you use on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think the readiness is a big component to it. I think the fear is also driven by just not understanding it, or really understanding how, what are the benefits and how can I use it? And there's clearly a knowledge gap, which we also see in so we cited a U.S. Chamber of Commerce report that also says that small businesses specifically are struggling with understanding what the benefits of AI are. And I also think, we live in a world where it's all a matter of extremes, right? So we've heard extremely great things about AI, but we've also heard extremely scary things. And where we're not hearing about it's just just all that stuff in the middle, right? And what are those good things and how it can be utilized to benefit. And so what I'm excited about in this data is that it's clear that people here see it as a big thing. They're excited about it. To Rob's point, they're nervous about it, but I'm excited to see that they're thinking about it, right? So they're ready. They're not just waiting to sort of see like, oh, let's see what happens. They're like, all right, let's start with this. And I think that there could be some, there's some really cool things that could come from that.
Well, and it's talking about sort of everyone's role, but that mindset you mentioned. I mean, you think about, I guess, imagine when, the railroad came out, and some people were like, oh, that's a stupid idea, and some people like, that's the future. Or when the automobile came out, and some are like, oh, that's never going to work, and they're the ones who changed the world.
Or just the internet.
When the internet came out, how many people, when we were all there, like, oh, that's never going to work, and some people said it is, and now they're running the world. So here's AI again. There's another disruptive technology. There's some people saying, oh, I don't know, it might not work, what if it fails? But there's a group, what's that mindset of people saying, I'm going to go into those waters? Because it is uncertain, there's a lot of uncertainty, but it might be that new disruptive thing. Do we have that mindset in New Orleans? You know what I'm saying? Other cities or people say, I'm going into that water, I'm going to figure it out. Is that the mindset? I know you can't read it in the report necessarily, or maybe, does New Orleans have the mindset of saying, let's go for it and figure it out?
New Orleans has people who are.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yes. So I would say, you have individuals who are, right? And so even, just as recently as, a few months ago when President Biden was here with the cancer moonshot, and that's AI, right?
Yeah.
That is an AI technology. At just Tulane specifically, you have faculty members that are really, driving into this. And so Nicholas Matai, he's a faculty member here. Two things about him. One is he has gotten grants about using community engaged AI solutions. And so he sees the real opportunity with AI as a way to, and an opportunity for New Orleans is how do you leverage AI to solve some of our unique challenges that may be overlooked by your typical sort of venture-backed, things. And then he's also co-teaching a course with Walter Isaacson on the digital revolution, right? And so I think, and then you have, Daniel Meth, you have even the World War II Museum is using AI. You've got in Bermuda that's doing AI things. And so there's just, it's there, but why are you laughing?
No. I'm laughing because last week I'm sitting at the New Society, and there's Matt Wisdom, who's working on an AI project with city data.
Okay.
Cool.
Brent McCrossin.
Yep.
Who's got his project, right? Products.
Yep.
Patrick Comer and Gripner.
Yep.
And we're working on an AI project around community, strengthening human connections. We're the old guys. We're laughing, we're all, there's a human beings that like to be early. So how do we go to the students or this next generation saying, how do we catalyze that mindset for the next generation and say, hey, that's where the puck is going? Mm-hmm. Do you see that in your students? That what are we seeing in the next generation of entrepreneurs to say this could be the next?
Yeah, I jumped all over this as a faculty member to say we are ingraining this in how we build businesses here at Tulane. In my classroom, what we do is I have a 2-semester student venture accelerator class. The senior year, it's one of the capstone courses for the entrepreneurship minor that we just launched. So we've got a new minor for students all across campus. And this is one of their sort of culminating classes. In their senior year, 2 semesters, they work in teams to build companies. Run that class, I guess 5, maybe 6 times now. And it's an amazing experience because the students are taking their own ideas and running with it. But I now tell them there are not 3 or 4 people on your team. There's either 4 or 5, depending on the size of the team, depending on the number. And that extra person is AI.
Yeah.
And I'm paying for a ChatGPT 4.0 subscription for you.
Yeah.
And you need to learn how to use it in the way that I was talking about earlier. It's not like you rely on that thing for the answers, just like you wouldn't rely on an extra teammate for the answers. It's also not like you wait until the 11th hour and have it do all the work. You need to build a persona of who that team member is and debate with it, ideate with it. And so that means when they're working on customer discovery and they're about to do their first survey, they're asking ChatGPT, how would you improve this? They're not saying, do it for me, right? They're saying, ask me questions about the things I should be thinking about when I'm doing a survey, right? It's literally engaging with the tool, because what is this tool? It is literally as great as we can get it. It's all human knowledge, essentially.
It's just a brain working all day at a super processing pace.
Working off of
So if a business
the
is
internet.
not using it, like if our business community, let's just not take entrepreneurs.
Right.
What would be your call to the New Orleans business community?
Play around with it.
If you're not,
Yeah.
what's going to happen?
There's real risk because you have to play around with it.
Yeah, I would say it's an adapt or die situation in the most extreme sense. But I think at the end of the day, though, that it's up to individuals, organizations, economic development agencies to not just assume that people are going to find out how to do this on their own. There is, if you don't have the technical background or the technical understanding, it's going to be really challenging to see how that can benefit me. So it's on the ecosystem to figure out the way to educate the community on how to utilize it and how to write those prompts, because it is time consuming to write really good prompts.
Would you go deeper in that? What can the ecosystem do? What's tactically can the ecosystem do, the 40 partners do to help position not only our entrepreneurs, but the business, the community at large? What can they do, or what can we do to help position our community for the future?
I mean, I think we're already starting to do it, and I want to see more of it, which is like the workshops that Nieux hosts around what you guys did with where Jonah hosted the conversation around human-centered. We are bringing the smartest people in our ecosystem on both AI and on what it means to be, focused on humanity in that conversation and be connected and to care about each other and be in community. Like, if we get that right, that is a unique value proposition in terms of New Orleans to the world. Because Silicon Valley is still trying to move fast and break things, okay? That's not a great formula in my mind. Nieux Matai, this is not new to him. He has been researching this for a long time. He's been doing it not just in the US, but in Australia. We are very fortunate to have Nick on faculty here, right? He is one of the leaders within, and I'll forget the acronym, but it's their community of the sort of Society for Computer Machine, like all of they're the people who do this stuff globally. He is co-leading the ethics task force for them, okay? Point being, Nick is one of the most connected people that I know in this world, and he's working with the people who have been building what we are now getting to use for a long time, okay? So we get to hang out with him and have these conversations, right? We get to hang out with, Arthur, who's been working at Google on Gemini for a long time. That's awesome. Why? Because we are a small community that actually knows each other, and that's a very exciting thing because we get to actually have real conversations about how we do it together and how we work together. I guarantee you in Silicon Valley, where they're debating PDoom scores, the probability of doom, as their parlor game, while still continuing to build it as fast as they can, they're not having a conversation about, in the same way, about how a community can come together. In New York City, they don't even know each other. Why? Because New York's so big and it's such a rat race. Everyone's just running so far and so fast ahead. New Orleans has value to add to these conversations, right? And that value is, how do we, as a city that actually cares about each other, that wants us all to succeed, that cares about the people who are more marginalized, have not been part of these conversations in the early internet, to now be a part of these conversations and lift it up and embrace? How do we ensure that our culture and that our curiosity and all the things that make us human are fully a part of what is going to happen next with AI? Like, that's a role we get to play. And so for me, part of it is, how do we lead in those ways? Because we have a rightful place to lead, because we are talented, we are smart, we're plugged into the broader global conversation, and we know who we are and who we want to be, right? All these other places I just mentioned, I don't think that there's that same sense of social responsibility and same sense of community and care as what we know that we have. That's part of why we're going to be an important leader in this broader conversation.
Yeah, I would say drilling it down even further in terms of what like organizations can do is also to ensure you're not approaching things from like a one size fits all scenario, right? So every company's going to have a little bit different. Even you hear it. So when going to a student perspective, you hear, students, every pitch we're hearing has some sort of AI, just the way it was a few years ago, it was blockchain, right? And so you have to drill down a little bit in terms of like, what actually do you mean when you say AI, what do you mean, right? And so same thing goes even with businesses and small businesses specifically who want to, leverage AI. It's these technical assistance providers, whether they're paying for it or whether they're not, to ask the questions like what, when you say AI, like what are you actually looking to do to understand what they're trying to do so that we can better help them. And so those are things that we hope we can do with our technical assistance we provide to the community. It's much more sort of tailored to what their actual needs are, because I do see a risk in us hosting a bunch of different workshops on AI, but it's still a little bit too obtuse, right? Because they can't necessarily see how it would benefit them, because you really have to sit down with them to say, all right, this is how you can use it, and these are the things. And so I do see there's an opportunity for all these great organizations to really work with their communities and reach out to us if we could be helpful, or other universities to identify those subject matter leaders to help.
There's a successful business person, I won't name her name, who we were talking about. She goes, I'm not going to start a business, but can AI help this? She goes, I have 3 kids, and I get 3 different emails, 3 different group me's, and she said the picture in her mind was the volleyball team, and all the kids had a blue uniform, but her kid had red, because at the bottom of the email it said it was red uniform day. So how would a human being know this? And so this has led to a company being built with AI. Point is, like, whether you want to be AI or not, the question is, how does AI? Can AI solve this problem?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those ideas. Do you think, like what you're saying is, New Orleans has advantages?
Mm-hmm.
What would be and you've made it, but if we would say 1 or 2 advantages over San Francisco, advantage of New York, what would you say that the ecosystem, that we've got money, we've got the universe, what are the 2 advantages? What's our competitive advantage?
Well, let's talk about those places first. Those places are building these tools, and they're making a lot of money from having built them, and all of the big tech companies are the ones that are investing in, and frankly, the big tech companies are these next generation companies. OpenAI is Microsoft, to be clear.
Bigger. Yeah.
Right. Claude is Amazon. They've all invested, and they've ingrained themselves in these companies. And so we shouldn't think that these are scrappy young startups. The very human beings that were behind these other companies, Peter Thiel, Reid Hoffman, again, PayPal Mafia, they're all invested in these companies. And so, to be clear, this is not that this is a new generation of scrappy startups in the Bay Area and some in New York now. It is, in fact, these are the same people that are taking things forward from where the internet was towards something that is such a transformative tool that's getting used in an array of different ways, right? And so we could never compete with that. We know that. And like New Orleans' ecosystem, and frankly, Nashville's ecosystem, Atlanta's ecosystem couldn't have done that, right? That was done with the people who were in the Bay Area, and then, many of them have homes in Miami or Austin, but the Bay Area was the center point for that, and then also New York. Great. So that is creating these amazing new tools that everyone else is trying to learn how to use now. What I would say to anyone listening to this who's with a larger company is you need to figure out how you can incorporate this into the things that you are already doing that could be done more efficiently, more effectively, frankly, in a way that would help you to learn better and have a better catalog of how you're doing things so you can streamline all of that. And do so without fear, because it's not like you're just bringing this in to replace the entire labor force. Like, the smart people who learn how to use these tools will be the ones who will be better equipped, and that will improve the way that things go. The analogy I use with my students is when I was growing up, we had a TI-83 calculator, TI-82 and then TI-83. And, that tool was not something that my math teacher said, you don't get to use this because you're never going to learn math. No, that math teacher said, great, we're going to learn even more advanced topics.
Yep.
We're going to get smarter, right? And if my math teacher at the, from Roanoke, Virginia, the Roanoke Valley Governor's School for Science and Technology, right, knew this is how we're going to use this tool, then I, as a faculty member at Tulane, should definitely be the one who's saying, how do I use this tool, like a TI 82, 83, and push my students further. And that's the way that I think most business executives should be thinking about.
That's the way Julia Lang at the Taylor Center, she says, quote her in the report, she says, AI is not necessarily going to replace you, but someone who knows how to use it will.
So,
and I think that's really,
so that's okay. That's an ominous and also, but that's not motivation. Last question would be this. I just picked up the 2030 Greater New Orleans Startup Report.
Okay.
What's it? And I'm gonna start with you, Emily. What's it gonna say? What's this report say 5 years from now?
So I'm going to put on my optimism hat. All right. I'm going to assume we have solved a good chunk of our challenges in terms of insurance and other infrastructure needs, right? And so with that, so I do think you see more startups being started in more of the high growth area. And I think we continue to see, we continue to see more investment coming from outside of New Orleans. And so that's one of the sort of the low-key highlights that's in here. Is I remember a time when people were talking to me about the fact that it's impossible to raise money outside of New Orleans, right? And that if they did, you were moving, right? That investor was coming and they were going to say you have to move. And I'm not saying that's still not happening. But what we are seeing in this is that the majority of money that a lot of these companies are raising are actually coming from outside New Orleans. And that's a really great thing that I think is showing that progress, right? And so I think we will continue to see that. I think you're going to see companies obviously are going to be taking on AI more because it's going to be completely different in 5 years. I mean, it's going to be completely different 6 months from now in terms of AI. And so that adaptation and staying up to date with that, I think is going to be a struggle. But I do think that there's going to be more people embracing it. That was a really long non-answer to your question.
Okay, I'm not going to let Rob off the hook. What does the report say? Give me the headline.
So,
the headline.
The best part about projecting things like this is that no one's going to listen to this 6 years from now and hold me to account, right?
I'm bringing it back up.
Oh, Emily.
AI can find it out. So give me the headline. I'm reading the report right now.
And I'm going to go super optimistic, and here's what New Orleans looks like in 6 years. Okay, I'm going to go super optimistic because I think that if the people listening to this hear this and believe in this, then some of them may build things that do this, and that's the world I want to live in.
Okay.
Which is this. Tim, do you know? Let me put it this way. What is holding AI back in the next 5-6 years? Is it the technology or is it energy? What holds it back?
Energy, but
energy is the
right Michael answer. Heck just said this yesterday on New Norman. I know where you're going with this.
Okay. The compute power, they can solve for that. Even the chips and the rare earth minerals, they think that they can solve for that. Okay. If you talk to people who are leaders in this and listen very closely to them about where they think things will go, right? The thing that will be the rate limiter on how fast AI can advance. Even with data, they're worried that they may run out of data, right? Quality data. They think that that's also something they're going to continue to be able to solve for. The one thing that people continually point to is energy. That this will become something that, because it takes, I think it's over 40 times more energy when you use ChatGPT for something you could search for on Google, right? So that's an interesting, I think it's 40 or 50 times. And yet these same companies are the ones that have committed to be net zero.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what does that mean for a place like New Orleans? Well, these companies are doing nuclear. We see that with what Alphabet's doing. They're trying to literally restart nuclear power plants that have been left and also start new ways of approaching nuclear. They're going to do that. They're then also going to move to other less clean forms of energy, right? And as they do, of course, we are well positioned for that. But here's the question. If they keep to that net zero, then how does that work? Like, how do they make that work in terms of being able to keep to their pledges to be net zero while also then investing more in things like even oil and gas, right? I think one of the answers could be carbon capture, which we are very well positioned for. So not only are we well positioned for all of the offshore wind and everything else that we've been doing and talking about, for solar, for the data centers that they would put in North Louisiana, et cetera, all those bode well for us, economic development wise. But also the future could be where oil and gas plays a part in this, but then carbon capture helps to offset it. We could benefit from both of those. This is literally how, this is not just an AI story, it's an energy story for our state. And if we're leading in the community-focused AI, for people who have a workforce that can be more dispersed, and you can have talented people and they can work here on companies and even start them here and grow them here, plus the energy having a huge renaissance. I mean, look, I am great with that story just so long as we do look at it as a like responsible approach. Because if we look at it irresponsibly, like that's how we sink further, and that's how we're in serious trouble, right? Like none of us want that world where New Orleans doesn't exist because of climate change. And so I think that that's the opportunity that we could see literally in the next 5-6 years. And as long as we're approaching that with real care and thought, I'm very excited about that because that means more investment dollars, means more attention, more money, and of course more economic uplift for everybody.
Yeah, I'd never thought about that in that regard until yesterday when I did Newell Norman with, shout out Newell, with Michael Hecht, and Michael Hecht brought that up, and I thought that was just really quite smart.
So if we're ending this, you might not want to leave New Orleans right now. What if it works? We could be positioned for the future, no? And there is an ecosystem in place, there's capital in place, there's universities in place, there's new technology, and maybe we're in a good position.
I think that there are very smart people who are going to be doing things quietly, and that will start to emerge. If this story I just told you, they're already doing the work.
That's great.
Right? And so, like, if the story I just told you is going to happen, then they're already doing the work. What is really wonderful, though, is that, like, the leaders are all understanding the possibility here. I mean, it's not just Michael. And like, there are a lot of people that I've been talking to that see this. And if you listen to podcasts of people in the Bay Area and others, this is also what they're talking about. The energy is a key issue, and nobody's going to do that better than literally from us stretching over to Houston. And so that's a huge opportunity for the state. This could be a great story for the energy and the AI future of our state. That sort of dual force could be a really wonderful economic boom for us.
Well, guys, thank you. Any last pitch? Where can they get the report? Where they get information?
They can get it from gnostartupreport.com. And for those of you who are listening who are founders, you'll be hearing from us in a couple of months asking you to fill out the 2025 survey. So we are excited to get your data.
We really appreciate everybody being a part of this. I'll just say, like, this is something that we thought was initially like a data gathering and research effort, which felt very dry and very academic. What we've seen is that actually it's a chance for the community to, one, create something together, and it is your data. It is something that we steward and care for very very thoughtfully and very carefully, because we do want to make sure that it is protected and used for the highest and best possible purposes. The other thing I would say is that for every partner organization that's been a part of this, those 40 that are doing this, like, we can't do it without you, and we want to make sure this continues to add value to organizations. So reach back out to us to make sure that we're doing that.
Well, thank you guys for your leadership. I mean, it takes the leadership like this, what you guys are doing, and your passion. Love the passion. And may we argue more about more things.
Confident we will.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.